Great. So, again, my name is Nataliya, and today I would like to talk a little bit of the sphere where I'm currently working a lot at. It's about secrets of high availability and happy operations. I would like to start with a story and actually ask the audience, do you know what is this jet? Or have you heard any stories around this jet? Yeah, so exactly. So this is a Boeing MAX, also called 737. It's actually famous for a really sad story of 346 persons died in two crashes last year and 2018. And unfortunately, the company have decided, because it was obligated by authorities actually to ground it until further investigation across the world. So I was following the story afterwards, and actually there was several publications in Bloomberg, for example, saying that Boeing software development was outsourced to 9-hour engineers in India. And then there was another interesting story about former Boeing employee saying that he was incredibly pressurized to keep costs down and downplay new features to avoid scrutiny with authorities. So I was thinking what really happened in the organization at that time, because the latest statement about software engineer stating that he was pressurized, actually public response from Boeing was no, it's not true. We haven't done that to our employees. Probably there was some blame game meanwhile inside the company, which leads to the culture of scapegoating. A little bit about myself. My name is Nataliya. I'm originally from Moldova, born in Moldova, raised in Ukraine, and then moved to Sweden. And now I'm working in a company called iZettle, which is a Swedish company focused on the payments and our mission is actually how to enable and support small and micro businesses to succeed in the world of giants. Speaking about Boeing's story again, I would like to talk a little bit more today about the culture, and that the culture is very important. And usually most of the problems in software development or any kind of engineering organization is caused by the culture which organization has. It's, as once Robbie Katanga said, culture is how organizations do things. So, but how about those people? Probably many of us knows those people in your organization as well. With bad habits, bad decisions, and actually toxic people around you. Important here to mention that we all live in very uncertain and volatile world, so-called VUCA world. This term was first introduced in the United States military during the Second World War. And it was basically a framework for military officers to make decisions in a certain situation, especially if a situation is highly uncertain and volatile. And as you can see on both axes, actually you can't predict sometimes the outcomes or results of your actions because of the uncertainty of your situation you're currently in. So you will ask, what is DevOps then, and why we're talking about that stuff? Actually, if you look at the history of DevOps as a term, it has been 10 years already in the industry, and yeah, so we still have DevOps as a job titles. We still have DevOps teams working in the silos. Sometimes we even hear that we don't need operations anymore, and of course, sometimes we also don't have time for experiments. So, DevOps is actually culture, and this is an important statement to understand about it. So, and also as a culture, it encourages collaboration and shared responsibility. Think about your current organization and your team. Probably each time you add new engineer, a new operations engineer in your team, your communication and connections becoming more and more complex. Because of that, many organizations struggle. And if you look at the typical hierarchies of organization, usually they build on the direct reports and manager structure. But they don't really look on organization from the point of view of communications in this organization. As once Melvin Conway stated, which is commonly known as Conway's law, is that organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structures of these organizations. There is additional statement from Melvin, which states that the law creates imperative to keep asking, is there a better design that is not available to us because of our organization? Speaking about DevOps, as you can see, it's a lot about how we organize and how we communicate with each other. Typical anti-patterns or pitfalls are sometimes when we work in the silos within operations team and development team. Another anti-pattern might be that we have a separate DevOps team which is supposed to be fixed DevOps for the whole organization. And last but not the least, we're stating that, yeah, let's pretend if we implement DevOps, we will not need operations anymore at all. So it's not easy to change because it's a culture, but it's possible. First, I would like to suggest us to think about understanding organizational concerns. There is an interesting framework suggested by Esther Derby. It's actually a set of questions you should ask yourself before doing any changes. One of them is, how do we achieve clarity so people know what to do? Then we should talk about conditions. What conditions are necessary for people to do good work? And last but not the least, what productive constraints will streamline decision-making and serve as a guiding principle? For those people who like visualizations more as I am, I suggest this model. So next time you will try to understand where your organization are with the culture, think about this 3-steps model. On the top, you see steering, which is in essence setting the vision of organization. And then we have enabling and enhancing. This is actually a group in your organization or general organization responsible for making a plan, prioritizing certain actions to make the visionary statement actually achievable. And then, last but not least, we have making, which is in essence development teams, operations team, DevOps teams. So think about, this is called also STEAM model and introduced in the Esther Derby recent book about change management called 7 Rules for Positive and Productive Change. I highly recommend it to take a look on it. However, think about where you are as an organization in this pyramid. I wouldn't be surprised if you have only management on top 2 levels and only teams on the making levels. However, there are organizations in the world where people and the teams are actually involved in all the stages. Build teams based on their communication patterns. Remember the slide was adding more people in the team and communication complexity. So again, back to the team topologies. It depends. It might be smooth collaboration between your development and operations team. It might be fully embedded development and operations, or it might be temporarily DevOps, so-called evangelists team, which is helping to introduce the culture and the mindset. The design, as Melvin again said, is almost never the best possible. Therefore, flexibility of organization is important to effective design. And here I would like to talk a little bit more about the interesting thing introduced in the recent Matthew Skelton's and PE book called Team Topologies, It's actually focusing on the different interaction patterns between the teams, which are collaboration, acts as a service, and facilitating. Let's take a look on each of them more closely. So what does it mean when it comes to collaboration? Imagine typical development and operations team. Collaboration means in this sense that they work closely together, ideally on the daily basis, or maybe with more programming or pair programming techniques. And then this is very, very important here, that they actually share the same goal. And of course that operations engineers should be comfortable working each and every day with development. An organization most probably should really have a strong technical leadership in this case. So let's move on to the second type of collaboration. It acts as a service, or sometimes also called infrastructure as a service or platform as a service. In this setup, as you can see, we still have a development and operations team but also we have a virtual group of DevOps people who actually mostly interact with operations team and make this connection more smooth. And also they provide some kind of bridge, narrowing the bridge between development and operations. In this setup, operations team is actually making sure that they provide elastic infrastructure platform to deploy applications. And most probably this organization might be also using the cloud already. Again, this structure is probably most suitable for organization with more like standard traditional ways of working with operations, with data centers, for example, physical servers, but maybe moving to the cloud. And finally, last but not the least, type 3, which is called facilitation. And in this case, it's also sometimes known as a DevOps team of evangelists or advocates, which are acting as a temporal team between operation and DevOps, and actually they sometimes have even expiration date. It requires a lot of facilitation to be done within this virtual group, a virtual team, and enabling the other teams to actually implement DevOps mindset. At some point, it wouldn't be surprised if this team will be kind of not needed anymore. So make yourself remove yourself from the business. This is the end goal of this team. Cloud. Speaking about cloud, it's fairly easy to say that we all should move to cloud and it will resolve all our development and operation legacy and problems. However, many organizations already have a monolithic legacy setups where they need to tackle as a dragons on this picture. And as you can see, usually they have a cloud architects around it, sysadmins, and several other roles, which they still need to keep because they still live in this legacy reality and they need to support this legacy. However, we need to emphasize that we need to love our legacy because most probably it made our business successful back in the days. And thinking back, this is an interesting quote from Kelsey, which I wanted to show you. It's about thinking back, we was able to do 95% of what we call cloud native with a bunch of VMs and application server and configuration management tools. But then we integrated the change management process, which current cloud providers is actually really good at. So choose your battles wisely. Instead of thinking only about cloud vendors and providers, think about your current technology stack when it comes to infrastructure. Most probably you will identify that they're using, for example, for monitoring, you're using already software as a service, but for data centers, probably some traditional on-premises setups. However, try to map your current situation and infrastructure and understand maybe which battles you are choosing by having on-premise setup. Maybe it's worth to move it, for example, to cloud. However, in some organizations, for example, payments and highly regulated organizations, it's not quite easy and it takes time. And sometimes you're even obligated to still have a data center and run your stuff on the servers. And then, interesting thing is actually, how do you know if you are successful with the change, especially when it comes to cultural changes? Implement some metrics. So here I would like to share with you the research from the latest State of DevOps, which is annual research from Puppets Labs. Usually they send it as a survey and asking organizations about their current set of DevOps practices and the teams. From the last year's State of DevOps, it was an interesting observation that those performance metrics like lead time, change fail rate, availability, deployment frequency, and time to restore really affects how high-performant organization is. So, for example, you can see in the more detailed table information about how frequency of deployment, for example, leads to the success of your organization and the success of your software delivery. In this case, if you are in a group of elite performers or high performance, it's probably you can do that on demand, deployment on demand. Another metric might be lead time for changes. It's how long does it take from the code commit to the code being deployed to production. which, as you can see in the lead group, might be less than 1 hour. And then there is another metric called time to restore services, which is how much time does it take to restore service from failure or outage. And another metric called change failure rate, which is also quite important to mention because it's how fast you can actually change something without failures in your system. Again, I would recommend you to look closely to the State of DevOps report if you are interested in this kind of researches and metrics or how to set up those metrics. And then interesting also thing to know about DevOps and general mindset is that incidents are normal. Incidents as of production errors or anything which is abnormal, and the most important about them is to actually learn fast and recover. This is why so-called practice of postmortems was suggested by Google back in the times, and actually it has more even long historical roots, and I would like here to ask, do you know who is this man? Yes? No? Yes. So his name is correct. His name is Taiichi Ohno, and he was inventor of Toyota production line. And he actually invented, as a part of Toyota production line, root cause analysis, which is the first step of activity, of postmortem activity. Here you see the Google suggestion on how to use postmortem facilitation. But the first step is actually identifying, with the use of root cause analysis, what's the root cause? By asking several questions, starting with why. As you can see, it might be why it happened, and it might be customers couldn't do something, they got an error, data was selected, but third-party dependencies, and we always use to the latest version. Basically, continue asking why until you don't feel that you actually found the root cause, or within your group, of course, not only you. And then the second step of typical postmortem facilitation is a problem prevention. It's actually asking the group, how might we prevent this problem from happening again? And again, it's more ideas generation rather than we will come out to the plan. And the last step is actually asking the group a question, how might we act faster on similar problems in the future? Or time to fix. And then, how about running experiments and learn continuously? First of all, experiments should be small and easy, and we shouldn't be afraid to fail. And as Esther Derby again stated, experiments provide fast feedback, are inexpensive, ideally of course, require no permission, and are easy to run. Herefore, I also would like to share with you some interesting framework, which is called double learning loop. Instead of just to ask questions how we can, after let's say we put experiment in place and failed, we usually only think about what can we do different next time when it comes to our actions. But how about asking yourself even extra questions? Are we doing the right thing when we set the experiment initially? So don't think only about the actions, think about also assumptions. And then you will say, what's the SRE? And why we're talking about SRE here as well. So SRE was first introduced by Google again, because they wanted to actually narrow the bridge between development and operations, and they want development software engineering practices to be applied for operations as well, and to actually make developers involved in operations, to be involved in the setting up of process of operations for the product. Think about it as, this is at least my favorite definition because I'm coming from the programming background. Think about DevOps as an abstract class or interface. And in that case, SRE or site reliability engineering will probably be a role or a job which will implement this in the abstract class DevOps. And responsibilities essentially are the same. It's about reducing organizational silos, accepting incidents as normal, leverage automation and tooling, and measure everything. This is the Google setup back in the times, which is also, if you're interested to learn more, take a look on the web dev topologies website. However, it's about how Google saw this setup working in practice. So they had the developers who were supposed to hand off their build to the SRE, or they're supposed to actually provide the testing steps and kind of say, okay, we think this is ready for production. And SRE will do, after the proper testing and verifying that actually everything is okay and safe to deploy to production, then take a responsibility of the production build. And sometimes the SRE even have a mandate that they can reject the software because it it's not according to certain standards, which was probably agreed between SRE and DevOps. Be careful with this model, because there is a typical pitfall when organizations not mature enough without proper DevOps mindset implemented, try to implement SRE approach. So next time you will think about it, think, do you really work in a DevOps mindset or culture way? And only after, probably you can consider actually implementing SRE in your organization. Remember Boeing example. Think about SRE as pilots who actually, when jet is in production, they kind of handing over the responsibility and be able to actually operate within this jet and knows all the pros and cons, and kind of there is an agreement between building engineers and pilots that this particular jet is working properly, which didn't happen, unfortunately, with Boeing 737. And then, last but not the least, you have to enable safe-to-fail environment in your organizations, which is essentially psychological safety. And you need to make sure that it exists by, if you're not afraid, being yourself, making mistakes, disagree, raise the problems, and ask questions. Thank you.